Get your hands where I can see them, boy! A nice sedan is a little too nice for a black fella dressed like you, don't you think?
Deputy Wade Colson barked a harsh laugh, deliberately slamming his heavy flashlight onto the hood when 16-year-old Micah raised his phone to record. Colson's face twisted into pure rage. With a brutal swipe, the deputy snatched the phone and violently shoved the boy to the concrete.
Micah! Stay down, boy!
Micah Solomon Reed gasped, moving to protect his grandson, but Colson immediately whipped out his steel cuffs, forcing Solomon's arm behind his back and slamming him hard against the gas pump.
Stop resisting! Don't move, Professor! People like you love to repeat big words, but on this dark road, you're just another animal matching a description. Shut your mouth before I put you where you belong!
The racist deputy thought he could abuse two suspects on a midnight state highway where nobody was watching. He had no idea he had just assaulted and handcuffed a newly confirmed federal appellate judge. Colson picked the absolute wrong man to pull over. Welcome back. Watch closely, because the reckoning begins right here. To understand the full weight of what Deputy Wade Colson had just set in motion, to understand exactly how far and how fast his entire world was about to fall, we have to rewind the clock a few hours. All the way back to the proudest night of a 16-year-old boy's life, because 6 hours before he was thrown to the concrete of a gas station, Micah Reed had been standing at a podium in a university moot courtroom 200 miles north, delivering the closing argument that would make him the youngest national champion in the history of the tournament. He was a high school sophomore who had beaten college seniors. He was the only competitor that weekend to draw a standing ovation from the gallery, and when the panel of 3 sitting judges announced their unanimous decision, the subject of the argument that had won it all, the argument the boy had delivered with a poise that made grown attorneys lean forward in their seats, was the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Remember that it matters more than you know. The man sitting in the front row of that gallery, weeping openly and not bothering to hide it, was Micah's grandfather. His name was Solomon Reed, and he had spent the better part of 40 years learning how to sit perfectly still while the world tried to make him flinch. He had learned it first as a young Marine, a judge advocate in a starched uniform, standing before panels of men who assumed a black officer must have been handed his rank rather than having earned it, and answering their doubt not with anger, but with a precision so total that it left no room for argument. He had learned it again across 15 hard years as a civil rights attorney, standing in courtrooms all over the South, representing families who had buried their sons, dismantling the polite fictions that let one county sheriff's office after another insist, year after year, that nothing was wrong. And he had learned it most deeply of all on the bench, first as a United States District Judge, and then, for exactly 19 days now, as a judge of the United States Court of Appeals, the second highest tier of the entire federal judiciary, the court where the great questions of American liberty are argued and decided and written into the law that binds every single officer in the land. Solomon Reed knew how to sit still. It was, in many ways, the discipline of his whole life, and it was not weakness. Stillness in the face of provocation is the most disciplined form of power there is. But on this particular night, he was not being a judge. He was being a grandfather. And that was the only title he had ever cared about more than any other. He was driving a 9-year-old midnight blue sedan, kept immaculate. The kind of car a man buys when he has stopped needing to impress anyone at all. His large hands rested easy on the wheel at 10 and 2. The way his own father had taught him half a century ago in a rusted pickup on a dirt road. He wore a soft gray cardigan over a pressed shirt, his reading glasses pushed up into close-cropped silver hair. And on his face was the quiet, involuntary smile of a man replaying the best 6 hours of his entire year. Because in the passenger seat beside him, wrapped in a hoodie, one long adolescent leg folded up under him, was Micah, and on the back seat, catching the amber glow of every streetlight they passed, sat the trophy. It was heavier than it looked. The boy had flatly refused to let his grandfather put it in the trunk. "You know," Solomon said, glancing over at him, "when I was your age, the closest I ever got to a courtroom was watching my uncle get sentenced for something he didn't do." Micah cracked one eye open. He had heard versions of this story before. He loved them anyway. "You told me. I'm telling you again. Because it matters." Solomon's voice was low and warm, a deep bass note that had steadied 1,000 nervous witnesses over the years. I sat in the back of that room, 12 years old, and I watched a man in a black robe decide my uncle's entire life in 90 seconds. Never once looked at him like he was a human being. And I decided right then, 12 years old, that one day I was going to learn every single rule that man was pretending to follow, every one of them, so that nobody could ever do to me what they did to my uncle without me knowing exactly, precisely, what they had done. And tonight your grandson quoted 3 of those rules from memory in front of a federal magistrate, Micah said, a tired grin spreading across his face, and made her laugh. "You made her cry. Boy, there is a difference. Judges laugh all the time. We do not cry easy." Solomon reached over and squeezed the back of the kid's neck. A gruff and enormous tenderness. "Your grandmother is going to lose her mind when she sees that trophy. She has already cleared the whole mantle." "Is she still up?" "Adele, she will be up. She will pretend she was not waiting. She will be sitting in that chair by the window with a cold cup of tea. And she will say, 'Oh, you're home.' Like she just happened to be sitting there at 1 o'clock in the morning." He shook his head, smiling into the dark. 51 years I have been loving that woman. She has never once fooled me, and I have never once let her know it." They drove on in the easy silence of people who love each other and do not need to fill the air between them. Outside, the highway had thinned to almost nothing. A 2-lane state route cutting through the flat black farmland of Callaway County, the last stretch before the interstate that would carry them the final 90 minutes home. There were no other cars, just the yellow dashes of the center line rolling under the headlights, the dark shapes of the trees, and above them, a sky so thick with stars it looked spilled across the windshield. It was the gas gauge that made them stop. The little orange light had blinked awake somewhere around the county line. And Solomon Reed, a careful man in all things, was not about to run dry on an empty road in the middle of the night with his grandson beside him. He saw the sign glowing above the trees. A 24-hour service station. One of those lonely outposts that exist to sell coffee and lottery tickets to truck drivers. And he eased off the highway and onto the cracked concrete apron beneath its wide steel canopy. The place was nearly deserted. A single semi-truck idled at the far edge of the lot, its cab dark. Inside the little store, behind a wall of glass and cigarette advertisements, one exhausted-looking night clerk sat hunched on a stool, scrolling his phone. 4 pumps stood buzzing under the canopy lights, and Solomon pulled the sedan up to the one nearest the road. "You want anything?" he asked, unbuckling his seatbelt. "They will have those chips you like, the ones your grandmother will not let me buy." Micah stirred, sitting up, rubbing his eyes. "The barbecue ones. The barbecue ones." Solomon smiled. "1 bag. and you do not tell Adele. Deal. Solomon Reed stepped out of the car into the cool midnight air. He stretched his back. 61 years old, and feeling every mile of the drive. And he walked around to the pump, slid his card, and lifted the nozzle. The numbers began their slow amber climb. He leaned against the flank of his own car, arms crossed loosely, and looked up at the impossible stars. And for one more moment, one last unbroken moment, Solomon Reed was simply a happy man on his way home. He never even heard the second cruiser coming. The first thing he noticed was the light. It came from behind him and above him all at once. A hard white spotlight that threw his own long shadow stark across the pavement and up the side of his car. And it was followed a half-second later by the low crunch of heavy tires rolling to a deliberate stop on the concrete. Solomon did not jump. He did not spin around. 40 years of discipline had taught his body to move slowly under scrutiny. Always. Because he had spent his entire life understanding a truth those men in the cruiser had never once had to consider. For a black man in America, a sudden movement can be a death sentence. And the burden of proving that you are not a threat is a burden you carry from the day you are old enough to be mistaken for a man. He turned his head, calm and unhurried, and he looked. A Callaway County Sheriff's Patrol vehicle had angled itself across the pump lot, its light bar dark, but its spotlight blazing, positioned in that particular way. Nose out, blocking the exit. That is never an accident and is always a message. The driver's door swung open, and a deputy climbed out. He was a big man, thick through the chest and thicker through the middle, somewhere in his late 40s, with a sunburned neck and a jaw set in the permanent grimace of a person who has decided in advance how the conversation is going to go. His name? Solomon would read a moment later off the little brass bar pinned above his pocket. Was Deputy Wade Colson. He had one hand hooked in his duty belt near the grip of his sidearm, and a heavy flashlight in the other. And he swung its beam straight up into Solomon's face with a jerk of his wrist, blinding him. The passenger door of the cruiser opened too. And a second, younger deputy stepped out, lean, maybe 26, with an unlined face and eyes that already, in the first 3 seconds, looked like they wanted to be anywhere else on earth. This one hung back near the front fender of the cruiser, one hand resting uncertainly on the hood. His name bar read Pruitt. He said nothing at all. Solomon lifted one hand slowly to shield his eyes from the flashlight, keeping the other hand in plain view, the nozzle of the gas pump still clicking gently in his grip. "Good evening, Deputy," he said. His voice was even courteous, unhurried, the voice of a man who has learned that courtesy is a kind of armor. "I am just filling up. On my way home." "Home where?" "About 90 minutes south of here. My grandson and I are driving back from the university. He competed in a tournament today." Colson did not so much as glance at the trophy on the back seat. Colson did not look at anything except Solomon's face, and Solomon's hands, and the 9-year-old car. And Solomon watched the man's eyes do the exact thing he had watched 1,000 pairs of eyes do across a lifetime. The swift, unconscious calculation. The sorting. The decision that had already been made before a single word of it was true. "This, your vehicle. It is. Registration, in your name. It is." Colson's flashlight swept slowly down over the car, over Solomon's cardigan, over his soft leather shoes. And there was in that single sweep an entire ugly editorial. "You know, we have had a string of break-ins out here. Rural properties. Vehicle thefts. Got a description of some subjects we are looking for. And I have got to tell you, He clicked his tongue against his teeth. You are matching up pretty good with what came over. And there it was. The lie, or something close enough to a lie, that the distance no longer mattered. Solomon Reed had heard it 100 times, in 100 courtrooms. Read it in 1,000 deposition transcripts. The magic incantation that transforms a citizen into a suspect. You match the description. He knew, with the cold certainty of a man who had spent 15 years litigating exactly this, that there was almost certainly no description. And even if one existed, he knew the only description that had ever really mattered here was one word long. And it was written not on any dispatch log, but on the color of his skin. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of the passenger door of his own car opening. Micah was getting out. Sir, Solomon said, keeping his eyes level on Coulson, his voice dropping into something quieter and firmer. May I ask what? Specifically, I am matching. What was the description you received? I asked the questions. Coulson took a step forward, into the pool of light beneath the canopy. And now he was close. Close enough that Solomon could smell coffee and old cigarettes on him. You got ID? I do. Let's see it. And Solomon Reed, who could have ended this entire encounter in 4 seconds by producing a single federal identification card that would have sent this man's stomach into freefall, did something else instead. Something deliberate. Something that came from the deepest and most principled place inside him. He did not reach for it, because standing there under that buzzing light, with his grandson's frightened breathing at his shoulder, Solomon Reed made a decision. He was not going to make this about who he was. He was going to make it about what was right. He was not going to let this man off the hook of the Constitution by flashing a title that almost no other black man on this road would ever have. He was going to stand there as an ordinary citizen and assert the exact same rights that the poorest, most powerless black man in Callaway County possessed in equal and identical measure. Because that was the whole point. That had always been the entire point. That the rights do not depend on the resume. Deputy Coulson, he said, reading the name off the man's chest. Now, his tone still perfectly polite. I am happy to have a conversation with you, but before I hand over my identification, I would like to understand the legal basis for this stop. Am I being detained? Or am I free to go? The silence that followed had a texture to it. The buzz of the canopy lights. The distant idle of the truck. The scrape of Micah's sneaker on the concrete as the boy came around the back of the car, and in that silence, Deputy Wade Coulson's face began, slowly, to change color. Am I being detained? Coulson repeated. And he said the words, the way a man repeats a phrase in a foreign language he finds personally offensive. He glanced back over his shoulder at the younger deputy with a look that said, "Can you believe this guy?" And he let out a short, humorless laugh. Where did you learn to talk like that? Huh? You watch a lot of television. I asked a simple question. Solomon said, unmoved. Am I being detained? Or am I free to go? If I am free to go, I would like to finish pumping my gas and continue home with my grandson. If I am being detained, I would like to know the reasonable, articulable suspicion that justifies it. Reasonable. Articulable suspicion. Coulson mocked the phrase in a high, sneering voice, and then his face hardened all at once. How about this for reasonable suspicion? It is midnight. You are loitering at a gas station in a county you do not live in a car that is a little too nice for a fella dressed like you, and you are matching the description of subjects wanted for a string of burglaries. That reasonable enough for you? Professor, every clause of it was poison. And Solomon catalogued each one the way he would catalog the errors in a lower court's ruling. You are loitering. He was buying gasoline with a credit card. A car too nice for a fella dressed like you. There it was. The naked heart of the thing. The assumption that a black man in a 9-year-old sedan must have stolen it. Matching the description. The fiction. He said none of this out loud yet. He simply stood, still as carved stone, and let the man hang himself, sentence by sentence. Because Solomon Reed had learned long ago that the single most devastating thing you can do to a bully is refuse to give him the fear he came looking for. But Micah had stepped fully into view now, and Colson's flashlight swung onto the boy. And who is this? This is my grandson, Solomon said. And for the first time, a low note of warning entered his voice. A fractional drop in temperature. He is 16 years old. He is tired. We are going home. He got ID. He is a minor. Deputy. And he is a passenger who has done nothing. You have no basis to demand anything from him. He is a subject. Colson snapped. You are both subjects until I clear you. He jerked the flashlight toward Micah's chest. So? You got some identification on you? Student ID? Anything. And Micah froze. Solomon could feel it. The way you can feel the temperature drop before a storm breaks. The boy's whole body going rigid beside him. His easy adolescent confidence draining out of him, and something much older and much more frightened rising up to take its place. This was the thing Solomon Reed had spent 16 years dreading and preparing for in exactly equal measure. He had given Micah the talk, the way every black father and grandfather in America has given it, since long before there were cars to be pulled over in. Keep your hands where they can see them. Do not reach for anything. Say yes, sir, and no, sir. Do not run. Do not argue. Come home to me alive, and we will fight it in the daylight. Where the law can hear us. He had taught the boy to survive. And now here they were. And Solomon watched his brilliant championship grandson, the boy who had made a federal magistrate weep 6 hours ago with an argument about the very amendment now being trampled into the concrete, shrink into a scared child under a hard white light. And something in Solomon Reed's chest went cold and clear and absolutely resolute. Micah, he said quietly, not taking his eyes off Colson. Look at me. You do not have to answer any questions. You get in the car, and you sit down, and you stay calm. Everything is fine. Your grandfather has this. Hey. Colson took another step. He is not going anywhere. Stay right there. So, he is a child, and he is getting in the car. Solomon said, and now the courtesy in his voice had crystallized into something else entirely. Not anger. Never anger. A kind of granite calm that was somehow far more unsettling than shouting could ever have been. You have not lawfully detained him. You have not lawfully detained me. And I am going to advise you, Deputy Colson, before this goes one single inch further, to think very carefully about what you are doing right now. Colson's face went from red to a mottled purple. Because men of Deputy Colson's particular disposition do not deal well with defiance in general, and they deal especially poorly with defiance that arrives in complete calme sentence, delivered by a black man who does not seem afraid of them. His entire authority, the swagger, the belt, the sidearm, the whole apparatus of intimidation he had rolled up in, depended on the other man being smaller. And Solomon Reed simply would not be small. And that was when Micah Reed did the bravest thing he had ever done in his short life. He lifted his phone. He held it up, the screen facing out, and in a voice that shook and cracked and then remarkably, steadied itself. He said the words his grandfather had taught him to say. I am recording. My name is Micah Reed. It is after midnight, and we are at the service station on Route 12 in Callaway County. My grandfather has done nothing wrong. These deputies stopped us for buying gas, and now they are threatening us. I want everyone to see this. And Deputy Wade Colson's face twisted into pure rage. Get your hands where I can see them. Boy, a nice sedan is a little too nice for a black fella dressed like you. Don't you think? He barked a harsh, ugly laugh, and he slammed his heavy flashlight down onto the hood of the car with a bang that echoed across the empty lot. And then, before Solomon could move, before anyone could stop it, Colson lunged. With one brutal swipe of his thick arm, he snatched the phone straight out of the boy's hands. And with the other, he shoved 16-year-old Micah Reed violently backward. And the boy went down hard, sprawling onto the concrete, the heels of his hands scraping raw against the pavement, his lips splitting against his own teeth. Micah Solomon Reed's voice tore out of him, a grandfather's terror. And he moved on, pure instinct toward his fallen grandson. He never reached him. Colson was already on him. The deputy whipped the steel cuffs from his belt, seized Solomon's wrist, wrenched his arm up hard behind his back, and slammed the 61-year-old man face first into the side of the gas pump. The cold metal bit into his cheek. The cuffs ratcheted down around his wrists. Too tight, cutting, and Colson leaned in close, his mouth against the judge's ear, and spat every word of it. Don't move. Professor, people like you love to repeat big words. But out here, on this dark road, you are just another animal matching a description. Shut your mouth before I put you where you belong. But here is what Deputy Wade Colson, in his rage and his certainty and his contempt, did not notice. When he snatched the phone out of Micah's hands, it did not turn off. It slipped from his grip in the same violent motion, and it landed a few feet away on the concrete, face up, in the shadow at the base of the pump, and its little red light was still blinking, and its camera was still pointed straight up at the canopy, and its microphone was still recording every single word, every insult, every crack of a boy's hands against pavement, every ratchet of the cuffs. All of it, the one piece of evidence Colson thought he had destroyed, was lying at his feet, quietly, patiently, recording his entire career into ash. And the younger deputy, Precinct, saw it. He saw the phone lying there, red light blinking, and he said nothing. He did the second bravest thing anyone would do that night. He let it record. Micah pushed himself half up on his scraped and bleeding hands, tears streaming down his face, and he cried out, "Grandpa, I am all right." Micah! Solomon Reed's voice came out muffled against the metal of the pump, but it did not shake. It did not break. Even now, cheek pressed to the cold steel, arm wrenched behind his back, wrists screaming, Solomon Reed spoke with the same terrible, level calm he had used all night. Stay down. So, stay where you are. Keep your hands where they can see them. Do not move. Everything is going to be all right. I promise you. Look at me. Everything is going to be all right. And then, still pinned, still cuffed, Solomon Reed turned his head as far as the deputy's grip would allow, and he spoke to Wade Colson in a voice that dropped so low and went so cold that it seemed to freeze the very air beneath that canopy. Deputy Colson, listen to me very, very carefully, because I am only going to say this one time. and there will not be a second chance for you after tonight. You have just laid hands on a minor child. You have just assaulted and handcuffed a man who committed no crime, on the basis of a description that does not exist. And I promise you, on everything I hold sacred, that this will be the single defining catastrophe of your entire life. Not because of who I am, because of what you have done. You will lose your badge. You will lose your pension. You will lose your freedom. And you will spend years of your life explaining to lawyers, far less patient than I am, why you thought a dark road at midnight meant that no one would ever hold you accountable. I am telling you this so that when the moment comes, you will understand. It began right here. Now I am going to give you one last chance to save what is left of your life. Get on your radio and call your watch commander. Right now, Coulson wrenched the cuffs tighter, and Solomon did not make a sound. You threatening me? The deputy growled. But for the first time, a thread of something uncertain had crept into his voice. Because suspects yell, and suspects beg, and suspects cry and fight and run. But suspects do not stand handcuffed against a gas pump at midnight and calmly read you your own future in the flat. Certain tone of a judge pronouncing a sentence. You are in no position to threaten anybody. Professor, I am not threatening you. I am doing you a professional courtesy. Solomon replied, which is a great deal more than you have shown me, or my grandson. Tonight, call your watch commander. Ask for whoever is supervising this shift. Tell them you are at the Route 12 service station. And tell them, word for word, exactly what you have just done, and exactly whom you have done it to. Do that, and you may still have a life in the morning. Refuse. And I promise you, you will not. I am not calling a supervisor over some mouthy trespasser. Coulson spat. I was not trespassing. I was not driving. I was pumping gas that I paid for with my own card. Solomon said, and you do not want to be the last person who touched this before your lieutenant sees it. You have no idea. You have absolutely no idea what you have done. And it was young Deputy Nathan Pruitt who finally broke. He had stood there through all of it, watching, and something in his face had been cracking the entire time. The ground of everything he thought he knew, giving way beneath him. And now he stepped forward fast, and he grabbed his partner by the arm still pinning the handcuffed judge against the pump. And his voice came out shaking and desperate and, at the very last second, brave, Wade. That is enough. Let him up. Let him up right now. Pruitt's eyes flicked to the boy, bleeding on the concrete. To the phone, with its blinking red light. To the whole impossible weight of what was happening. We did not have a description. You know we did not have a real description. Dispatch said be advised. And that was it. That was all they said. We do not have this. We cannot do this. Ease off him. Wade, I am calling the lieutenant. I am calling Frank right now. And you are going to let this man stand up. Please. Please. Before you end both of us. It was not a grand act of heroism. It was a scared young man in an impossible position finding, in the very last available second, the small and enormous courage to grab his partner's arm and say the word no. But Solomon Reed, who had spent his whole life believing that the entire future of this country rests on precisely whether ordinary people can find that small courage at that last second, felt something move in him even then. Cheek against the cold metal. Wrists bleeding, because his grandson was watching. And this was the lesson, worth more than any citation, any settlement, any headline on earth. Courage is not facing the criminal. Courage is turning to the badge next to you when it goes wrong and saying no. Coulson stood frozen for a long, seething moment, his partner's hand on his arm, the boy's phone recording, the handcuffed judge utterly, terrifyingly calm against the pump. And then, with a muttered curse, "Hell, let go," he hauled Solomon upright by the cuffs, spun him around, and shoved him back against the pump to stand. But he did not remove the handcuffs. "Fine," Coulson snarled. "Call the lieutenant. And when Frank Delgado gets here, he is going to back my play. And then you are going to wish you had just handed over your ID like a normal person." He jabbed a thick finger an inch from Solomon's face. "You do not move." "I could not move if I wanted to," Solomon said quietly, lifting his cuffed wrists a fraction. "You have made very sure of that." Pruitt had already turned away, pressing the radio microphone clipped to his shoulder, and in a voice that still had not stopped shaking, he called it in. "Dispatch. This is Unit 294. We need a supervisor at our location, the Route 12 service station. Immediately. Is Lieutenant Delgado available? We need him to roll to us. We need a supervisor on scene right now." There was a crackle of static, and then a woman's voice. "Zoppe. 294. Lieutenant Delgado is en route. Estimated arrival. 7 minutes. 7 minutes." Solomon Reed leaned back against the gas pump, his hands cuffed behind him, his cheeks stinging, his wrists raw, and he looked at his grandson, still down on the concrete, still bleeding from his lip and his scraped palms, still crying, and he put every ounce of the steadiness he had left into his voice. "Micah, look at me. Son, I need you to do something for me. I need you to be brave for 7 more minutes. Can you do that?" The boy nodded, gulping air. "I need you to reach over, very slowly, and I need you to pick up your phone, and I need you to keep recording. Do not stop, no matter what happens. You keep that camera going. You understand me. What is on that phone is the most important thing in this entire lot right now. More important than me. You keep it recording. That is your job for the next 7 minutes. Can you do your job?" And Micah Reed, 16 years old, national champion, bleeding on the concrete of a gas station at midnight, wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his scraped hand, and he reached over, and he picked up the phone, and he held it up with both trembling hands, and he pointed it at his handcuffed grandfather, and in a voice that shook but did not stop, he said, "Still recording. It is 12:17 in the morning. My grandfather is in handcuffs. He did nothing. I want everyone to see exactly what they did." "Good," Solomon whispered, and his eyes were wet, but he was smiling at the boy. A small, fierce, unbreakable smile meant for Micah alone. "That is my grandson. That is exactly right." Those 7 minutes were the longest of Deputy Wade Coulson's entire life. And for Solomon Reed, cuffed against a gas pump, they were a master class in something far older and far harder than the law. In dignity, in the terrible, quiet power of a man who simply refuses to be broken. He did not shout. He did not struggle. He stood there against the pump, and he watched Deputy Wade Coulson slowly come apart at the seams. He watched the sweat bead along the man's hairline and slide down past his ear. He watched Coulson shift his weight from one foot to the other, and back again, the arrogant swagger leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. He watched the man glance. Again and again. at the phone in the boy's hands, at the small red dot, the merciless, unblinking eye of it, and he watched the slow, sick arithmetic begin behind Coulson's eyes as the man started, at last, to add up exactly what he had said, and exactly what he had done, and exactly who might one day hear every word of it across the lot. The night clerk had come out from behind the glass door and was standing there, phone in hand, mouth slightly open. The idling semi-truck had gone quiet, its cab light flicking on, and a driver, sensing something, was now watching too from behind his wide windshield. His own phone raised. The dark and empty lot had become, without anyone announcing it, a courtroom, and Solomon Reed, handcuffed against a gas pump, was still the only man standing in it who understood that he was the judge. Coulson could not stand the silence any longer. "You know," he said, trying to rebuild his authority with words, his thumb worrying the edge of his belt, "if you had just been straight with me from the start, none of this would have—" "You approached me with your hand on your gun," Solomon said, and though his voice was quiet, it cut clean through the man's sentence and stopped it cold. "You blinded me with a light. You told me my car was too nice for a fella dressed like me. You demanded papers from a 16-year-old child. You threw that child to the ground. And you have handcuffed a man who committed no crime. There was never going to be a version of tonight where I helped you feel comfortable about any of that. Deputy, I am not responsible for your comfort. You are responsible for the law, and you have broken it. Over and over, in front of witnesses, on camera. So no, I will not be straight with you. I will be correct. And by morning, you are going to understand the difference between those two things very, very well." And then the headlights swung off the highway. They came in fast, faster than the residential road should ever have allowed. A dark, unmarked SUV that took the turn into the lot with a controlled urgency, that spoke of a man who had heard something in a radio call that had frightened him badly. No flashing lights. It did not need them. The vehicle slid to a stop directly behind Coulson's cruiser, and the driver's door flew open, and Lieutenant Frank Delgado stepped out. Delgado was a lean, silver-templed man in his early 50s, a 25-year veteran of the Callaway County Sheriff's Office, and he wore the sharp, unhurried competence of a career supervisor who has already seen every kind of disaster a badge can create. He took one long look at the scene as he came across the lot. A handcuffed man, slammed up against a gas pump, a bleeding 16-year-old boy on the concrete, holding up a phone, his own deputy standing over both of them, sweating and purple-faced, and his other deputy, the young one, standing off to the side, looking like he was about to be sick in the bushes. And Lieutenant Frank Delgado stopped walking, and the color drained out of his face so fast that Solomon, even now, even cuffed, almost felt sorry for him, because Frank Delgado had spent 11 months of the previous year in the gallery and on the witness stand of a federal courtroom 2 counties over during the long, grinding civil rights trial that had followed the death of a young man in a neighboring jurisdiction, a trial that had made every newspaper in the region, a trial that every officer for 100 miles had followed with a knot of dread in his stomach. And Frank Delgado knew. The instant he saw that dignified gray head, exactly whose gas pump his deputies had chained a man to, he had watched that man deliver a ruling from the bench. He had watched that man from the gallery take a room full of the most powerful attorneys in the state and reduce their arguments to ash with 3 quiet questions. "Oh, may God," Delgado breathed, And then his voice cracked across the entire lot like a rifle shot. "Coulson, get those cuffs off that man. Get them off him right now." Coulson blinked, thrown completely off balance. "Lieutenant?" "We got a call." There was a description. Subjects matching. "Wade." Delgado's voice was low and lethal, and shaking with something very close to raw terror. "I need you to shut your mouth. And I need you to take those handcuffs off that man this instant. Or, so help me God, I will take your badge myself. In this parking lot. Tonight. Do it. Now." Coulson's hands were shaking so badly he could not fit the key into the lock. He fumbled it, dropped it, cursed, snatched it back up off the concrete. And finally, on the third try, the cuffs came free. Solomon Reed brought his arms slowly around in front of him, and he looked down at the raw red rings the steel had cut into his wrists. And he rubbed them once, without hurry, and he said nothing at all. He let the silence do the work, and Lieutenant Frank Delgado did something Solomon had seen very few officers ever do in his entire life. He removed his cap, he tucked it under his arm, and he walked the last few steps forward alone. His whole body bent into a posture of complete and abject deference, and he stopped a respectful distance away. And he said, in a voice loud enough that every single person in that lot heard every word of it, crystal clear, "Your Honor, I am so deeply, profoundly sorry." The word landed like a thunderclap on the concrete behind Delgado. Deputy Wade Coulson's face went slack. His jaw dropped open. He swayed on his feet, one hand reaching blindly out to steady himself against his own cruiser. And Solomon watched the horror bloom across the man's features in slow, dreadful stages. First confusion, then disbelief, then the beginning of a comprehension so total, so complete, so utterly catastrophic that it looked, on his face, almost exactly like grief. "Your Honor, I—" "What?" Coulson said, his voice barely a croak. "Judge, he is," said Delgado, without turning around, his eyes fixed on Solomon in stricken, mortified reverence. "The Honorable Solomon Reed. Until 3 weeks ago, he was a United States District Judge. He is now a judge of the United States Court of Appeals, a federal appellate judge. Wade, one of the most senior members of the entire federal judiciary in this whole region. He reviews the convictions we bring. He rules on whether our stops, our searches, our arrests, and our use of force are constitutional. And you," Delgado's voice finally split down the middle, "you just threw his 16-year-old grandson to the pavement, and you handcuffed him to a gas pump, and you called him an animal. On camera. Over a description that never existed. And Deputy Wade Coulson made a sound. It was not a word. It was the low, broken sound a man makes when the floor of his entire life gives way beneath his feet all at once. He staggered forward a step, toward Solomon, his hands coming up. And now the words tumbled out of him in a rush of pure panic. "Your Honor. Sir. I did not. I could not have known. I was just... We got a call. I was doing my job. Sir. Please. I have got a family. I have 22 years on this job. Please. You have to understand. I did not know who you..." "Stop." Solomon Reed said it very quietly. And Coulson stopped as though he had walked into a wall. "Stop talking and listen to me. Deputy, because I am about to tell you the single most important thing you will hear in your entire life. The whole lot went silent. Even the highway seemed to hold its breath. Micah, still on the concrete, still holding the phone up with both bleeding hands, went perfectly still. The clerk, the trucker, the young deputy, everyone, and Solomon Reed, 61 years old, the raw red marks of the handcuffs still burning on his wrists, drew himself up to his full height, and he looked Deputy Wade Colson dead in the eyes. And he delivered the reckoning. You said, "Please, you have to understand. I did not know who you were. And do you hear yourself? Deputy, do you hear what you are confessing? Because you have just told me, in front of this camera, in front of these witnesses, that the only thing that would have stopped you tonight, the only thing that would have kept you from throwing a child to the ground and chaining an innocent man to a pump, was knowing that the man happened to be a federal judge. That is your defense, that you did not know I was important enough to leave alone." His voice was rising now, not into a shout, never a shout, but into something far more powerful, a slow, gathering thunder, and that, Deputy Colson, is the entire disease. Because I want you to understand something, and I want everyone here to understand it. The fact that I am a judge is the least important thing that happened on this concrete. Delgado blinked. Your Honor, you heard me. It is the least important thing. Solomon's dark eyes swept across the entire scene, and his voice carried into the dark like a bell. Everything I said to your deputy tonight, I said, as an ordinary citizen, every right I asserted. I asserted as a man standing at a gas pump. Am I being detained? Am I free to go? What is your reasonable suspicion? The Fourth Amendment did not protect me tonight because I sit on the Court of Appeals. It did not protect me because I know the case law. It protected me because I am a person, and it protects every person in this country equally, whether he wears a robe or a work shirt, whether he drives a new car or a broken-down one, whether he holds 3 degrees or has never once seen the inside of a school. That is the entire meaning of it. That is the whole promise of the thing. He took a step forward, and now the granite was total in his voice. And that is precisely what should terrify every single person listening to this. Not what happened to me. I was never truly in danger. Because I happen to have spent my whole life learning the exact words that would freeze your deputy's hand for just long enough. But I want you to imagine, Deputy Colson, I want you to lie awake tonight and every night after this, and imagine the version of this that happens to somebody else, where the man at this pump is a plumber, a school teacher, a father coming home from a double shift, a 19-year-old kid driving his mother's old car, who does not know the case names, who has never heard the words, "Am I being detained?" who reaches too fast for his wallet because an enraged man with a gun is screaming at him to produce his papers. Solomon's voice dropped, and it was terrible in its quiet. That man does not go home tonight. Deputy, that man ends up on the ground with your knee in his back, or in the back of your cruiser, or on this boy's phone for a reason that ends every one of our lives. And there was nothing about my conduct or my grandson's conduct tonight that was any different from that man's, except that I knew the words, and he would not have. That is not justice. That is a lottery. And I have spent my entire life, every year of it, trying to make certain that the color of a man's skin and the depth of his legal education are not the difference between coming home and never coming home again. So, no, my title is not the point. The point is that you did this to a human being, and you would have done it, gladly. to anyone at all who looked like me. The silence that followed was absolute and total. The night clerk was crying. The young deputy, Pruitt, had turned his face away, and Deputy Wade Colson stood in the harsh white light of the canopy. A big man made, suddenly and permanently small, staring at a black man in a cardigan who had just been thrown against a gas pump, and who now towered over the entire lot without ever once raising his voice. Solomon turned to the lieutenant. Lieutenant Delgado, I want to be very clear with you about what happens now, so that there are no surprises when the reports are written and the questions are asked. And they most certainly will be asked. First, that phone. He pointed to the device still held up in his grandson's bleeding hands. It never stopped recording. When Deputy Colson tore it out of my grandson's hands, it landed at the base of that pump, face up, and it captured every word and every act. The assault on a minor, the false statement about a description, the unlawful arrest, every racial slur, all of it, in high definition, with sound. I want that footage preserved, and I want a certified copy of it made before this lot is cleared. I also want both deputies' body-worn cameras preserved in full and unedited. And I want the dispatch log for this entire shift pulled and locked down tonight. Because I have a very strong suspicion, a reasonable and articulable one, which is a great deal more than your deputy ever had about me, that when that log is examined, there will be no description at all. There will be no burglary bulletin matching me in any particular. There will only be a vague, hours-old note from the far end of the county, and a deputy who decided a black man at a gas pump was reason enough. Delgado nodded, his throat working. I will preserve all of it, Your Honor. Tonight, personally. Second, Solomon's voice hardened further still. Deputy Colson placed his hands on a 16-year-old child and threw him to the ground, causing injury. He handcuffed and physically assaulted a citizen who had committed no crime. Those are not administrative matters, Lieutenant. Those are crimes. And when a sworn officer, acting under the authority of his badge, deliberately violates a person's constitutional rights, that is a federal crime, prosecutable under the laws of the United States, and it is investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, not by the officer's own department. So I am instructing you now. This is not to be handled quietly, and it is not to be handled in-house. Deputy Colson is to be relieved of his badge and his weapon before he leaves this parking lot tonight. And I expect the sheriff of this county to be standing on this concrete before I am willing to leave it. He is already on his way. Your Honor, Delgado said quietly. I called him from the road. Sheriff Pike will be here in 10 minutes. Good. Solomon's eyes flicked. Hard. To Colson. Then he can watch his deputy be taken into custody in person. Colson made a strangled noise. Custody. Your Honor. Please. You assaulted a minor and falsely imprisoned a citizen. Deputy. And it is all on video. Solomon said flatly. You do not get to walk out of this lot tonight and go home to your dinner as though this were a paperwork error. That is precisely the impunity that made you think you could do it in the first place. That ends tonight. And it ends with you. And it was in that moment that a second set of headlights, and then a third, came racing off the highway. The sheriff's vehicle, and behind it a marked cruiser, sweeping into the lot with their light bars, finally, belatedly blazing. And out of the lead vehicle climbed Sheriff Roland Pike, a heavyset, politically ambitious man who had been asleep in his bed 20 minutes earlier, and who now understood from the single strangled sentence his lieutenant had managed on the phone. That his entire career was standing in the balance on a slab of gas station concrete. Pike came across the lot at something close to a run. And when he saw the raw handcuff marks on Solomon Reed's wrists, and the blood on the boy's lip, and the phone still recording, all the blood drained out of his face too. "Your Honor," the sheriff began. "Your Honor, on behalf of this entire department, I cannot possibly begin to—" "Sheriff Pike," Solomon said, cutting him off. Calm and cold. "I am going to save you the speech, because we both know you did not drive out here at midnight for me. You drove out here for the video. So, let us not pretend. Here is what is going to happen. Your deputy is going to be arrested tonight. On your concrete. In front of the camera, he tried to destroy. And you are going to make sure it is done by the book. Because every second of it is being recorded. And because the Federal Bureau of Investigation is going to review every frame. And then, Sheriff, you and I are going to have a very different kind of conversation. Because a man does not learn to say that one matches before he even steps out of his cruiser, unless he has been saying it and getting away with it for a very long time. And a department does not shield a man like that for 22 years unless the shielding is the culture and not the exception. So I am putting you on notice right now, in front of these witnesses. Deputy Colson is a symptom. Your department is what I intend to see examined." Sheriff Pike swallowed. "Your Honor, In the morning," Solomon continued, relentless and quiet, "I am going to make a referral to the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice. Not about the individual conduct here tonight. That will go through the ordinary criminal channels. And I will not touch it. And I will explain to you why in a moment. I mean the pattern. I am going to request that the Justice Department open a formal investigation into whether the Callaway County Sheriff's Office engages in a pattern and practice of unconstitutional stops, searches, and arrests, particularly of black residents and black travelers, in violation of the Constitution of the United States. Do you understand what that means? Sheriff, that is not one deputy. That is every stop your department has made, every complaint it has buried, every report it has closed without a look, every family it has told, quietly, that nothing was wrong. It goes back years. And if the Justice Department finds what I believe with all my heart it is going to find, then this county will be operating under federal court supervision. A consent decree, with mandated reforms and an independent monitor reporting to a federal judge, before this boy on the ground graduates from high school. That is how you cure a Wade Colson. Not by firing one man and calling it justice, by dismantling the machine that built him and the silence that protected him, so that the next Wade Colson never gets the chance to do this to another family on another dark road where he thinks the world is not watching. And then Solomon Reed said the thing that separated him, forever, from every small and vengeful man who had ever held a fraction of his power. And here is why I will not touch the case against Deputy Colson personally. I am going to recuse myself, completely and formally, from anything that touches this incident, this department, or this county, for as long as it takes to resolve. My clerk will paper that recusal first thing in the morning. I am a witness here tonight, and I am a victim, and I will not sit in judgment of the men who did this, because justice must be clean, or it is worth absolutely nothing. I could crush Wade Colson personally. I have the power to do it, and I will not. Because the moment I use my office for revenge, I become exactly the kind of man who abuses power that I have spent my whole life fighting. This is not revenge. Sheriff, revenge is small. This is accountability. And accountability must be spotless. Or it means nothing at all. Do you understand the difference? Sheriff Pike, ashen, nodded. Yes. Your Honor, then arrest your deputy. And they did. Right there. On the concrete of the Route 12 service station. In the flashing red and blue light of the cruisers. Deputy Wade Colson was relieved of his badge and his service weapon. And his hands. The same hands that had thrown a child to the ground 20 minutes before. Were drawn behind his back. And the same steel cuffs he had used on an innocent man closed around his own wrists. And the phone, held in the bleeding hands of a 16-year-old boy, captured every second of it, and only then, with it finally over, did Solomon Reed turn away from all of them? The ruined deputy, the terrified sheriff, the weeping clerk, and cross the concrete to his grandson. He knelt down, 61 years old, his knees protesting, so that he was eye to eye with the boy, and he took the phone gently from Micah's shaking hands and set it aside. Still recording, and he took the boy's scraped and bleeding palms in his own 2 large hands. And for a moment, he could not speak at all. "Are you hurt bad?" he finally asked. His voice thick. Micah shook his head. And then the fear he had been holding at bay for 20 minutes finally broke over him all at once. And the tears came. And he choked out, "I was so scared. Grandpa, when he grabbed you, when he put the cuffs on you, I thought he was going to." I know. Solomon pulled the boy into him, one hand cradling the back of his head, the way he had held him when Micah was small and the world was a simpler place. I know. So, I know. I was scared too. Do not ever let anyone tell you that being brave means you were not afraid. I was terrified. Every black father and grandfather in this country carries that fear every single day. From the moment their boys are old enough to be seen as men, that fear is the water we swim in. It never goes away. He pulled back and held the boy's tear-streaked, bloodied face in his hands. But listen to me now. Listen. Being brave means being afraid. And standing still anyway. It means knowing the words and saying them calmly, even when your whole body is shaking. You did that tonight. Micah, you lifted that phone when a grown man with a gun screamed at you to put it down. You said your name. You told the truth. And when he threw you to the ground and put your grandfather in chains, you got back up on your bleeding hands. And you kept that camera recording. Because I asked you to. Because it was your job. And you did your job. That is the bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do. Braver than the trophy on that back seat. Do you hear me? Yes. Sir, Micah whispered. And I need you to understand what really happened here tonight. Because it is the most important lesson I will ever teach you. And I need you to carry it long after I am gone. Solomon's voice was raw now. And unashamed of it. It was not my title that saved us. It was the law, the words, the Fourth Amendment, and the cases you studied, the ones you argued this very afternoon. Knowledge. Micah, that is the shield. They can take a great many things from a man in this country. They have taken so much from so many men who look like you and me for so very long. But they cannot take what you know, and a black man who knows the law, cold, all the way down, and who can speak it calmly with his hands visible and his voice steady on a dark road at midnight. That man is not powerless. That man is the single most dangerous thing there is to a system that runs on people not knowing their rights. You are going to be that man. So, you already are. That is the whole reason I taught you. He pressed his hand flat against the boy's chest. Over his heart. The trophy goes on the mantle. But this goes with you everywhere. For the rest of your life. Do you understand me? And Micah Reed, crying and bleeding and 16 years old, threw his arms around his grandfather's neck. And Solomon Reed held his grandson tight on the concrete of a lonely gas station on the side of a dark highway in Callaway County, under the buzzing lights. And for a long moment, neither one of them said anything at all. Here is what happened after that night. In the daylight, where the law could finally hear Deputy Wade Colson's assault, and his lie, and his contempt had all been captured in perfect, high-definition clarity by a phone he thought he had destroyed. It caught his words. It caught the crack of a boy's hands against the pavement. It caught the ratchet of the cuffs and the slam against the pump, and the moment he called a sitting federal judge an animal, and it caught the raw red marks on that judge's wrists, and the blood on that boy's lip. The dispatch log confirmed exactly what young Deputy Pruitt had said. There had been no description. There had been no bulletin. There was no vehicle, no location, no detail of any kind. There had only ever been a vague, hours-old note from the opposite end of the county, and a black man buying gas at midnight. Micah Reed, with his grandfather's blessing, posted the video the following afternoon. By the end of the week, it had been watched more than 40 million times. But this time, unlike so many times before, it did not simply become another name, another hashtag, another tragedy the world scrolled past. Because a federal appellate judge had preserved the evidence himself, and because the man who did it had been arrested on camera the very same night. Wade Colson was terminated for cause and stripped of his law enforcement certification. He was charged, in federal court, with deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and with the assault of a minor. And when the case went to trial, the jury needed less than 3 hours to convict him on every count. When investigators finally pulled his complete history, they found precisely what Solomon Reed had known they would find. 19 prior complaints over 22 years, from black residents and black travelers, alleging the exact same conduct, invented descriptions, pretextual stops, unlawful searches and rough hands. Nearly every one of them closed, buried, filed away, believed by no one, because the word of a badge had always outweighed the word of the people it was pointed at. Colson went to prison, not for as long as some thought he deserved, but he went. And for the families of those 19 buried complaints, watching a man like him finally answer for it was a kind of justice that had been a very long time coming. Young Deputy Nathan Pruitt kept his job, though it was not easy. Some of his fellow officers called him a rat and made his life hard, exactly as Solomon Reed had warned him they would. But others, more than he had expected, told him quietly that he had done the right thing. And one older sergeant told him it was the first time in his whole career he had watched a young officer choose the truth over the code of silence, and that it had given him hope. A year later, Pruitt applied for and won a new field training role, teaching incoming deputies about lawful stops and the limits of reasonable suspicion and the constitutional rights of the very people they were sworn to serve. He kept a printed copy of the Fourth Amendment taped inside his locker, and underneath it, in his own handwriting, he had written 3 words: say no, calmly, Lieutenant Frank Delgado cooperated with everything. And when the United States Department of Justice opened its formal investigation into the Callaway County Sheriff's Office, acting on the referral Solomon Reed made the next morning and then recused himself from entirely, Delgado was among the first to walk in the door voluntarily and hand over 6 years of documentation he had been quietly keeping about a culture that punished honesty and protected men like Colson. The investigation took 19 months. It found what Solomon had believed it would find. And it ended exactly as he had predicted on the concrete that night. In a federal consent decree, mandatory body cameras, activated on every stop, automatically preserved, a strict, enforceable ban on pretextual stops and invented descriptions, constitutional training for every officer, every year, a new, independent civilian review board, with real subpoena power, reporting directly to a federal court, and an independent monitor, appointed by that court, to make certain the reforms were real and not merely words on a page. The county fought parts of it. The county lost. And 2 years after a black judge and his grandson were assaulted at a gas pump on a dark road, the Callaway County Sheriff's Office was a fundamentally different institution. Not perfect. No institution is ever perfect. But changed. Watched. And finally, genuinely accountable. The stone had changed its shape, and Solomon Reed never sat on a single case that touched any of it. He recused himself completely, papered it the very next morning, and refused every interview that came near the specifics. Because accountability, he had said, must be spotless, or it is worth nothing at all. And he meant it, all the way down. Even when it cost him the satisfaction of the gavel, he gave exactly one public speech about it. Months later, at a law school commencement. And he did not talk about himself at all. He talked about the plumber, and the school teacher, and the 19-year-old kid driving his mother's old car. The ones who would not have known the words, the ones the Fourth Amendment must protect, or it protects no one. He talked about the water and the stone, and he ended it by introducing the young man sitting in the front row, in a suit, a size too big, who had, he told the graduates, done the single, bravest thing he had ever seen a human being do. Bleeding on the concrete of a gas station at midnight with a phone in his shaking hands. His grandson, Micah Reed, who had just been accepted, early, to study the law. They gave the boy a standing ovation. And Solomon Reed stood in the wings and wept, unashamed, and did not let anyone see him, though every single person in that hall did. On the mantel in the Reed home, next to the window where Adele still pretends she was not waiting up, the debate trophy sits to this day, catching the light. But if you ask Micah Reed, who is, as this story is being told, well, on his way to becoming exactly the kind of judge he promised his grandfather he would be, which award he treasures the most, he will not point to the trophy. He will tell you instead about a night at a gas station on Route 12, and a shield made not of brass, but of knowledge, and a tall, gray-haired man who stood in chains under a hard white light and taught the whole watching world, one calm sentence at a time, that a person's dignity is not something anyone gets to hand him, or take from him, on a dark road where they believe no one is watching. This is a work of dramatized fiction, but the truth underneath it is as real as the road you drive home on tonight. Every single year, on quiet highways, and in nice neighborhoods and at ordinary gas stations all across this country, people are made to prove that they belong, made to prove that they are not a threat, made to justify their own presence in their own lives. And far too often, the only thing standing between them and a tragedy is whether or not they happen to know the words. So know the words. Know your rights. Calmly. Cold. All the way down. Because knowledge is the one shield they can never take away from you. Stay steady. Keep your hands where they can see them. And keep your voice level. Make a record. And never stop recording. And when it is your turn to stand beside a badge that is going wrong, find the courage, in the last available second, to reach out and grab the arm and say the word no, because the stone does change its shape. Slowly, patiently, one brave, ordinary, immovable person at a time. And it changes because of people exactly like you. If this story moved you, take 1 second and hit that like button, because it genuinely helps more people learn their rights. Share this video with someone you love who drives home late at night. And subscribe. And turn on the bell so you never miss another powerful story of dignity, courage, and justice that arrives, even when it arrives late. Now, tell me in the comments below, have you ever been made to prove that you belonged somewhere you had every right to be? And if you were the badge standing next to a badge going wrong, be honest with yourself. Would you have found the courage to say no? I am reading every comment. I will see you in the next one.